Drahé divačky a drazí diváci, milovníci vědy a dokumentárního filmu. Vítám vás na 56. ročníku Akademia Film Olomouc při rozhovoru k soutěžnímu filmu Když už víš. Jmenuji se Dominik Vontor a jsem asistentem Industry for Science. Jsem moc rád, že naše pozvání přijali režisér filmu Emmanuel Cappelin a americký novinář a environmentalista Richard Heinberg. Hello, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to have you both here, and I just cannot start with any other question than to ask, when did you two first meet, and when did Richard become one of the protagonists in the film?
It's a long story, it's a long process, but I had been writing about this film since 2012, and we met in 2014. So it had already been 2 years of thinking about the project when we first met, and it was thanks to Eric Valli, who is a photographer and director, who directed an episode of a series called The Earth Seen from Above by the French photographer Yann Arthus Bertrand. And they had done one of the series was about the end of oil, and they had traveled to the United States to interview Richard, he will introduce himself better than I can, but who is one of the leading people to talk about energy and energy depletion and peak oil. And so he said, you really need to talk to Richard. So I didn't have any budget for this film at the time, and so I used the production of another film called Human, which is another project by Yann Arthus Bertrand I was working on, and we were able to meet Richard for that project. And I actually used that interview sort of as a first foot in the door, may I say, or first way to get to know Richard more personally. And it was so important, this to me, it was so striking, this interview. It was really, really saying what I had been trying to say with my film, that I decided that I really needed to follow Richard. So then I came back the next year to do more a larger interview, this time for the film, and this was the basis for a lot of the voiceover that you hear in the film. But we actually didn't use the images of that first preliminary interview. It was just enough for me to say, this is right, this feels right, we need to continue working together. And then I followed Richard as opportunities came about. So it was sometimes very last minute. When I came to visit him, the same day or the next day, he had a recording at the Philharmonic of his city orchestra, and so I local orchestra, and so I said, oh, please let me join you and follow, and I recorded what became a really beautiful moment in the film. So this was really unplanned, and just what sometimes happens in documentary filmmaking, where you just let life happen. And then we also had occasions to meet in Greece when we were in the middle of the Greek financial crisis and social crisis and so on. So long story short, basically, it was a very long process of being patient and finding moments when we could meet and find places that had some symbolic value to represent the issues we were talking about, which were energy depletion, overpopulation, and overshoot issues more generally.
Richard, you are a fellow in a post-carbon institute, and you specialize in the era since the start of the fossil fuel revolution. So maybe can you explain us your perspective on how fossil fuel revolution changed the world and how it creates the problems we face now?
Right. Well, fossil fuels have changed the human experience profoundly. In just the last 200 years, our population has grown from 1 billion to almost 8 billion. Our per capita energy usage has grown 8-fold. So that's per capita across the whole world. For many human individuals in countries like mine, the United States, energy usage per capita is many, many multiples of what it was prior to the fossil fuel revolution. And of course, manufacturing has expanded. The middle class has expanded. It used to be that 90% of people worked on farms to produce enough food for the people living in cities. Now 1% or 2% of the population can produce enough food for everybody else. So everybody's moved to the cities to get jobs. That's why the middle class has expanded. Occupations have exploded in number. We created a consumer society where during the 20th century, we could make so much stuff so fast that the problem we had was overproduction. And that was one of the causes of the Great Depression. So that problem was solved by the creation of consumerism, which is essentially an economic system that promotes the consumption of as much stuff as possible through advertising, through planned obsolescence, through consumer credit, so as to keep the economy growing, so that everybody will have a job, so that the governments will have tax revenues, and so on. This is completely unprecedented in all of human history. There's never been a time like this before. The problem is fossil fuels have to be burned and in order to release their energy. And those little fires, wherever they're occurring, release CO2 into the atmosphere, which changes the chemistry of the atmosphere. And each of us depends on hundreds of those little fires. Maybe one is in our car, one is heating our home, one is producing our clothing, another is, and you can go on, and add all those together, and it's billions of little fires. Each of them is controlled. Each of them is efficient as we can make it. But add together all of those billions and billions of little fires, and the amount of CO2 that's being released into the atmosphere is absolutely extraordinary. So we've gone from 280 parts per million to what is it today? I don't know, 420 parts per million, something like that. And the Earth is heating. This is only one of the problems that we're facing as a result of fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are also resulting in changes to soil chemistry, ocean chemistry. As a result of being able to consume so much stuff, we're drawing down other resources, whether it's forests or fish or minerals in the Earth's crust. So Emmanuel used the word overshoot. This is a very important word because it describes what we're doing now in relation to Earth's ability to support human life. We're overshooting the carrying capacity of planet Earth for humanity. This is a very serious situation.
You both gentlemen were interested in the climate change from the very early age. In your case, Emmanuel, there was not one initial breaking point, but for you, Richard, there was. You read the book, The Growth of Limit. What's kind of a different emotional processes happened in both of your situations when you were first aware of the climate change?
Do you want to start, Emmanuel? Okay. Well, as Dominic just said, I read Limits to Growth when the book first came out, which is in 1972. So I was 21 years old at the time. So I was just starting on my path as an adult human being. And suddenly I was confronted with the information that the way of life into which I had just been indoctrinated by years of schooling and university and so on, that basic way of life is inherently unsustainable. It can't continue beyond a certain point, and that point would happen probably within my lifetime, toward the end of it. So I decided to try to understand why this was the case, why humanity had entered upon this unsustainable path, and what to do about it. Was there any way to change our path? Was there any way to, get off this highway to doom? And so that's basically how I've spent my career. I spent years looking into whether psychology would hold the answers, or religion, or this or that. It wasn't until the 1990s that I realized that energy was the key to everything, understanding energy. And since then, of course, I've written books and so on, but I still lose sleep at nights. It's not as though you can confront this information once and for all and integrate it and, okay, that's fine. What's next? It's once you're aware of this situation, it's what I call toxic knowledge. You can never have a normal life after that because it colors everything you do. But so each of us has a choice to make, to be aware of the situation that humanity is in, which means having this toxic knowledge, but possibly having the opportunity to do something about it, or on the other hand, to stay asleep, to try to, ignore and deny what's going on, and thereby, maybe have a happier life up to a point, because beyond a certain point, nobody's going to have a happy life under these circumstances. So there you go.
Yeah, in the editing process, I had the chance to get my hands on the original recordings of the first public presentation of the Limits to Growth report by the Meadows team in front at the Smithsonian Institute in the United States in I think it was 71, 1 year before the report came out. And it's very interesting because when you hear all the seminars, the conversations that continue throughout the day, and the questions that the public ask, and in the public you have top officials from the Nixon administration. They had really high-level people there who were listening to these results, and at the time already, they understood what the results meant profoundly. And then there was a whole period of denial and of saying, in a cornucopian worldview, saying that technology is going to save us or buy us more time. But one of the top officials of the Nixon administration, I forgot his name, asks, does this mean that we would have to put in place at a world level, not even nationally, some kind of socialist order? And you can imagine where there's the Cold War and all of that is going on, and it really summarizes I would say my own journey with that question. So when I was a kid, I was just sensitive to the environment, and so I wanted to be a photographer, a nature photographer, and work for National Geographic, like every kid who likes frogs, And then I became more knowledgeable about all the interdependency of the social aspects together with the environmental aspects, and on and on and on. And as you said, it was a very gradual process, very incremental. And and then some moments in my life, it really sank in. When I talk about it in the film, there's this moment where I was reading the newspaper, and I was living in Canada at the time. And I read that for the first time, a sailboat had been able to reach to get near to the North Pole. So this kind of unreachable place in our collective psyche suddenly had been breached, and it was a very powerful moment for me. And there has been other moments like this since then, where you really understand the situation that we're in, because like what Richard was saying, this is so unprecedented that we have no comparison to really understand, comprehend as a biological entity what is happening to us, which is much greater than us. And then from this very scientific basis, but really more profoundly understood, meaning what are the consequences for me, for my family, for my local community, for my country, for the world order that we're in. I've moved on to this last step, which is back to square one, this Smithsonian conference in 1971, when people were saying, wait, if we want to transition as peacefully as possible, does this mean we have to redistribute resources in a way that we have never have before? And I I'm asking those questions to myself. I don't have the answer, but what's for sure is that what we have been able to do so far is to say there are no limits, right? We're pushing back the limits. There are no more conventional oil, no problem. We'll go to unconventional sources, and to push back ever and ever. And right now we are starting to hit real boundaries. And as long as you can say the cake can get bigger every day, you don't have to share the cake, because you can say everybody can have a bigger pie tomorrow. It just is not going to be the same size of pie for everyone. But once the pie is constrained, then you have to start talking about sharing. And I would say my journey has been coming to that comprehension, that right now what is going to either make us or break us as national entities, as communities, is whether or not we're able to share what remains as fairly as possible. This is called fair shares rationing. Long story short, once again.
So you both mentioned the book Limits of Growth. What made it so influential?
No, it was just the simple. Yeah, it's the simple logic of the. We're talking about limits to growth, right? It's the simple logic. We live on a finite planet, so you can't continue growing the rate at which you're extracting resources and dumping wastes into the environment forever. So at some point, growth has to cease. And this was the first attempt that anyone had made using systems dynamic modeling via a computer, and what was at that time pretty primitive, or what from our perspective is pretty primitive software. At the time, it was the best software you could get, but 1972. But using the software to model the possible interactions between population growth, resource depletion, pollution, economic activity, and so on, just a few factors. This is the first time this had been done. And no matter how they tweaked the input data, okay, let's assume that there's actually twice as much resources as we currently think there are. So we'll arbitrarily double the Earth's reserves of copper and iron and so on. And even if you do that, it doesn't make that much difference because of the inexorable arithmetic of geometric growth. If you have any quantity that is growing at, let's say, 1% per year, that implies a doubling time. After 70 years, that quantity will have doubled. So if you have a system that's growing at that time, the global economy was growing at about 3 or 4% per year. Well, that implies a doubling time of, less than 20 years. And that's exactly, of course, what has happened. The size of the global economy continues to double the last doubling has occurred since about 1997. Since 1997, we've used half of all the resources that humanity has ever extracted from the Earth's crust: oil, iron, copper, aluminum, all this stuff. Half of all that we've ever used, we've used just since 1997. So can we double that again? Can we double that again? No, it's not going to happen. So the only question is, when and under what circumstances do we reach the end of this process of growth? Do we do it willingly and through a process that Emmanuel was talking about, where we all decide to share equitably and then ratchet down our consumption in a way that maximizes human happiness? Or do we fight over the scraps? That's the choice that humanity faces in the 21st century.
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. Emmanuel, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I think what's extremely special about this report, the end of, I was going to say the end of growth. There's another good book, by the way, by Richard. What's very special with the limits to growth is, I think, that the stars aligned for that book or that report. You had, I would say, at least 4 stars. You had, as Richard was saying, the very beginning of computing capacities that allowed you to understand feedback mechanisms that were very complex to calculate. And when you introduce delays, so a feedback mechanism is when an action creates a reaction in another part of the system. And a positive feedback mechanism is when it self-reinforces. So, for example, with climate change, we have all these little fires Richard was talking about that are creating an initial increase in CO2 emissions. This is increasing heat in the atmosphere, and the heat is melting down the ice at the poles. The poles are changing albedo, which is their reflective capacity, and the white snow is being replaced by dark water, and suddenly the Earth by itself has the capacity to increase the heating mechanism, the heating cycle, because now the heat that's coming on Earth, instead of being reflected, is being absorbed by the water, and it's warming up. But it's not humans that are doing it, it's the Earth itself that's having a positive feedback mechanism. And you have all kinds of feedback mechanisms in all complex systems. And they're very, very often not intuitive. And with computing capacity being developed at MIT by Jay Forrester at the time, we were for the first time able to calculate these kinds of feedback mechanisms, whether they were positive or negative, self-reinforcing or canceling out each other out. And yeah, thank you. And so that was the first, I would say, piece to the puzzle. And then you had a bunch of rich people who were industrialists at the time, who had enough free time to think about what was happening on Earth, and who were flying around and seeing our world change very rapidly, and who were genuinely concerned about the future of humanity. This was the humanist movement, we could say, and who really wanted to find solutions, or at least understand better what was happening. And so they put a bunch of money into research. So that you needed finance, and that finance came from the Club of Rome. And then you had a very young, smart team of people who were led by a very good leader, team leader, who was Dennis Meadows. And then last but not least, and that's the most important part, you had his wife, Donella Meadows, who was a very good writer. And she was able to tell a really good story with all of the mathematics that they had been able to churn out of their machines. And so you had, technological capacity, finance, the right team to do the job, and then a really good writer to share that with people. And I'm telling this story because I think it really talks to the importance of finding a way to reach people and to touch people. And there have been very few books who have become, cult books in the environmental movements like this one. The other one is, I would say, Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And there also you had a very good writer who was able to tell the story of the loss of biodiversity that was happening because of the use of chemicals in the United States in the 60s. So all of that is to say we need good stories, and everybody loves a good story, and that's really is the key to striking the mind, I would say.
Emmanuel, last time we spoke, I asked you what has the greater impact on the progress of ecological change. If it was more of science, if it was civil activism, if it was politics. And I remember you told me it's a combination of everything. And I just want to know if you can elaborate on that. And I'm also interested in Richard's opinion and his point of view.
We have a saying in France which says basically, we have the leaders that we deserve. And so there is either a vicious or a virtuous circle between our elected officials and ourselves. And even once you have elected someone, your actions on the ground will affect the way they behave, more or less, depending on the leader. And so I think it's very important that you keep that in mind and to say, okay, am I going to act with courage on the issue of climate change and all of the related social issues that go with that? Speak the truth, say what is the situation and act accordingly in your life. And if you do that, then you are going to help your elected officials to do the same. It's not an automatic relationship, but it has to start from there. And so, I that is my belief. Now, it might, some people might think that it's naive, that once people are officials are elected, they don't care how you act or what you do. But actually, that's all they care about is really, what their the people who voted for them think and want. And it's one thing to say it by writing or sending letters to your elected officials, but it's also another thing to really take to the streets and lead by example. And right now, we're in France. The movie will be released in theaters on September 22nd. It has been pushed back six months because all the theaters are closed here. And so we're preparing an impact campaign with a really nice little booklet where we're giving people examples of how they can act. And it's like almost 200 different actions that you can do, and it's like a big tree of action. And some of them start with elected official, I do this, and others are citizen, I do that, and others are entrepreneur, I do this. It's really saying that we need to talk to everyone, and everyone needs to be able to look at each other and find examples and role models. And they're not going to be just in the hardcore, radical, civil disobedience movements, and they're not going to be in the very bureaucratic elected official sphere either, and they're not going to be in the green tech entrepreneurs of the world. It's really is going to have to be all three, and this is what I hope the film can help strive towards.
Yeah, well, yeah, sure. Emmanuel said it very well. There's not much I can add. The incentives for policymakers are mostly in the wrong direction. And it's not just that they're corrupt people who are taking money from the fossil fuel industry. There are certainly instances of that here in the US and probably elsewhere around the world. But the incentives are for elected leaders to keep the growth machine on track, to keep the economy producing profits for industry, increasing salaries for workers, more jobs for workers, and therefore more taxes flowing to government so that the government can provide more services. These are all the assumptions that are built into the system as it exists. And so when people are elected to public office, it's literally their job to make this thing go the way it's designed to go. Unfortunately, the way it's designed to go is pushing us in the direction of catastrophe. So we really need to change the whole structure of incentives, and that can't happen entirely from within the sphere of government. It's going to take a great deal of pressure, not just from environmental campaigners, but from ordinary citizens who start to understand what's actually going on and who have a conscience and who are concerned about the world that their children and grandchildren are going to inherit. So awareness is absolutely key to all of this. And that's why I think films like Emmanuel's and books like the ones that we've been discussing are absolutely critical.
You too promote the idea of localism. Next to many other things, it is a subject of Richard's book Afterburn, but it's also something that's part of the story in Once You Know. And I'm interested if you think that localism and living in the local communities is the right way to improve our future. If we start adapting right now to this system, do we have time to have our future better and positive and more accessible?
Do we have enough time? No one knows. We just have to do what we have to do. Localism is basically a response to the energy decline that is inevitably in our future. Globalization has been based on cheap energy for, obviously, for manufacturing, for resource extraction and manufacturing, and then for transporting resources and finished goods from places where they're abundant to places where they're more scarce. This is the modern economy. But you start taking away energy, and it's clear that the system is not going to work so well. So the only rational response to that is to start relocalizing economic activity wherever we can. And of course, the place to start is with food production. Our current food system is inherently unsustainable from many perspectives. The chemicals that we use, the way we treat topsoil, on and on. But also the way we produce food and ship it for long distances. We need to get to know our local farmers and have more people producing food. We need to be nations of gardeners rather than nations of button pushers who rely on somebody, hundreds of miles away producing huge surpluses, and then through means that are probably very destructive of soil and nature, and then shipping it to us. So that's the rationale behind localism. To fully make the transition back to local economies, it's going to take some time. It's going to take educating ourselves with practical skills about how to grow our own food, how to make more of our own stuff, clothing and dwellings and all these sorts of things. I mean, right now we're encouraged always to just rely on experts and hire somebody else to do everything for us. What if we did more for one another? What if we did more for ourselves? We're more self-reliant. Well, there would be obvious psychological benefits and social benefits. But again, we have to relearn some of those skills. We have to change our expectations, change how we live.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Emmanuel, do you have something to add?
I think Richard said it all. I would just add that my personal experience in relocalizing has been trying, because you have to, reassess what kinds of expectations you can have and not have. And it's very hard work, and it's not, the romantic return to the land. It's people flee to the cities because they have a wonderful thing called anonymity, doing what you want and not paying the consequences of doing what you want in the city. When you live in a village or in a smaller community, neighborhood, people know you, and people you have to earn their respect through your actions, and you have to keep that respect. And so all of that is. I've been living in this village here for about 10 years, but it's entirely by choice. I didn't grow up here. I didn't find a job here. I didn't have family or come on vacations. It was really just a feeling of connection with the land and the people here. But then it really is very patient bond or relationship building work. And I think that's an aspect that can be seen as a constraint, or that can be seen as a beautiful and empowering process. And I think a lot of the success of localism is going to hinge on our capacity to be very realistic, to have realistic expectations on what it can bring us and what it cannot bring us.
But there is also one other option, which is changing to the different energy systems and energy sources. For this, we would need to rebuild and restructure the cities. My question is if it is possible only for the newly built villages, or is it applicable for the big cities that we see now?
Yeah, it's possible to relocalize within urban environments. I mean, overall, I think we are going to have to re-ruralize society to a large extent. More people will need to live closer to the land. Really big cities with many millions of people are probably not sustainable over the long run. Again, we're talking about large shifts that will take time to accomplish. So it's not as though we're saying, everybody needs to leave the city tomorrow and find a small farm. There are stages to the process. One stage would be rethinking the suburbs. A great many people who live in urban areas actually live in suburbs where they have a little bit of land that they can use themselves or share with their neighbors for small-scale food production. And by reorganizing suburbs, right now, many American suburbs are organized in such a way that people don't even know their next-door neighbors. It's just, you get in your car and you go and go to work or go shop or whatever. But if suburbs could be reorganized around neighborhood hubs where there is shopping, commerce, opportunities for processing food that you produce on your own little place, then suburbs could become new sort of permaculture villages that would be quite sustainable. And then for production of grain crops, obviously you need larger fields that would be further out, and some people working mostly full-time in grain production, so on. I mean, this is in some ways running the circle of progress that we've seen over the last 100 years backwards. But we could do it much more intelligently than it was being done in the 19th century, agriculture and social organization and so on. This isn't about returning to either the lost golden age or the bad old days, depending on how you think of it. We're really talking about the next phase of cultural evolution, which will have some features that are similar to what we experienced in the past, but it's not going to be the same thing. It's impossible to return to the past, in fact. So we need to invent it as we go along.
Richard, in your book Afterburn, you mentioned two important things: that it's always important to be well advised and being inspired. And you say that the challenges that we face are made for heroes and heroines who can see opportunity in the crisis that we face. My question is, who are those heroes and who are those heroines?
Well, ultimately, it has to be all of us. I mean, we can't just look to Greta Thunberg or someone like that and say, oh, she is making the world leaders aware of what's going on and good for her. It's ultimately up to all of us. We have to have the courage to speak up, to stand up, even to get arrested if that's what it takes, in order to make the kinds of changes that we're talking about. And sometimes it's not something we do in public. Sometimes it's learning a new skill. It can be just hard work that it would be a lot easier just not to do that. But, when you realize that maybe your future or the future of your children, grandchildren is going to depend on us making these changes, well, maybe that's enough of an incentive to locate that hero or heroine within yourself who's willing to do something difficult or to stand up in public.
Gentlemen, I think that we all would agree on the fact that it's really important to emphasize the scientific knowledge and the scientific research. But my question is how to best deliver the science to those people who don't use internet, who don't watch documentary films, those who don't go to conferences, to the bookstores, those who are not TED Talks followers. What are the best ways how to deliver the science to those?
I'll start, but you can. I'm sure you have lots of things to say. Richard has spent his lifetime communicating to a wide public, so I think he really has a lot to bring to the table. I think the first thing is we need to stop talking about nature and saving nature. Nature is fine. Nature has all its time. It has a very different time scale that it is unfolding on. And, it's been around for a few billion years, or, first life forms, 3.2 billion years. And it's going to continue no matter what we do to it. So it's the earth is fine, nature is fine. We have a problem. We have a very big problem. And so we need to start changing our little plastic bags that say, think about the planet or do something for the earth. No, it's do something for your children, because what we are undermining is the carrying capacity of the ecosystem services and the carrying capacity more generally of the earth for our children. And this is, I think, the main idea that needs to be communicated, because then it's not about either you care about social issues or you care about the environment. Either you care about people or you care about the planet. It really is caring about the people to talk about environmental issues and climate issues. So I would say that's the main thing, is to create that connection and to show how the two are completely intertwined, and that the climate is like a matrix within which everything is possible or everything is impossible. And we are creating a matrix in which everything is going to be impossible. So the most basic things in life, growing food, finding shelter from extreme events, are going to become impossible on the trajectory that we're on. So I would say that's one of the first points to try to get across, that it's not about the earth or the environment. It's about us. And I would say for those who are most, selfish or individualistic, I will use a quote that I love from Edward Wilson, who is one of the 20th century great biologists, who in a book called Biophilia tries to develop what would be an environmental ethic. And he says, I'm sorry if I'm going to shock some of the readers, but I don't think that we owe anything to future generations, because moral duty or moral responsibility just loses any kind of meaning across centuries. It's just too far off. But if we use a greater dose of evolutionary realism, then if there is one meaning to life that is certain, at least from a biologist point of view, is that our life meaning is to make sure that we create the conditions for our genes to propagate. And so basically we need to give the most optimal conditions for our next generation to be able to survive. And so if you look at it from that point of view, then caring about the environment is really caring about your children, and that is what we are here on Earth to do. And this is our most biologically inscribed duty. And this is what can give meaning to everything we do in life. And people should draw upon that, because this is like a shared experience that we don't have to explain, and it works across cultures. So I would say, talk to your neighbor, tell them it's about their children, and start from there.
Yeah, well, what causes us to develop our opinions. Very often it's a sense of connection with people closest to us. So it's not a matter just of writing books or making films or making big speeches. It's how we talk to the people that we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis. If they're aware of what we're thinking and our concerns and our values, and then they see that we're people who walk our talk, that is going to have much more influence than probably anything else that we do.
Well, I must say it's really depressing topic when you think about it all the time. So my question is, do you have any effective way how to cope with environmental grief? Or do you have any effective way how to not get mad when thinking about all these bad things that are happening in the nature and what people are doing to the nature?
I've been, as I said earlier, I've been with this information for a very long time, and I find that keeping a personal lifestyle that's balanced and close to the ground is extremely helpful. So we keep chickens, and having some contact with non-human animals, I think, is really, really helpful psychologically in dealing with this, climate grief or whatever you want to call it. And also coming in contact with nature in other ways, wild nature, going for walks in the woods and on a daily basis, not just, once a year or something, but get out of the urban environment as much as possible. It's extremely important. And for myself personally, engaging with aesthetic production in somehow, making something beautiful, whether it's playing a musical instrument or drawing or gardening can be an aesthetic outlet, but creating beauty in some way, I think, is just the most psychologically regenerative process that I've found in my own life, and I suspect it's the same way for a lot of people. For myself, of course, it's playing the violin. I spend a couple of hours a day doing it. That's an extravagance, but but it's what it takes. Maybe I'm kidding myself. Maybe it's no. I think it's what it takes to keep myself as sane as I am in view of all of the stuff we've been talking about. Life is inherently beautiful. In fact, life is intentionally beautiful. Beauty it has evolved with nature, with life, and that's for a reason. So don't turn your back on that. Prize it, celebrate it, contribute to it, and then take that energy and direct it toward the as Emmanuel was saying, the world that our children will inherit. Let's make that a beautiful world, but also a livable, survivable world.
I think Richard is not kidding himself when he says he needs 2 hours a day playing the violin to keep sane. I think this is the old wise man talking, and I'm the young, silly activist who is completely out of balance at the moment. I'm head over heels working with Extinction Rebellion here in France and making a film and building a positive energy housing project at the same time, and I'm constantly tired, and I am losing grip with reality instead of being grounded by some kind of daily practice. And I think, and I hope not in too much time, in a few years' time, I will be as wise as Richard, and I will be, every day doing some kind of practice. And the housing project we're working on has a permaculture project all around it. And so I hope that I will be spending most of my time outside building and growing and benefiting from this subsistence agriculture, rural agriculture project. But at the moment, I have to say that I am out of balance, and it's a very difficult thing to find. And I would tell every viewer that they really need to take this seriously, because there is no end to your efforts to save the world. So you really need to give up on that. You're not going to save the world. Nobody's going to do that, even collectively. The world is too big, but you can, try to save yourself by trying to find coherence between your understanding of the situation and your daily actions and your relationships. And if you do that and find some kind of personal practice to stay grounded in the present, then I think that the toxic knowledge that Richard was talking about can actually be a liberating kind of knowledge. But otherwise, it just is some kind of burden that you carry around all the time, every second, every minute of your life. I would end on a positive note, saying that just yesterday, with my partner, we had a big conversation about this, and that I'm working on it.
Emmanuel, do you play any musical instrument?
No, I don't, but I love dancing. And so last night, I spent a lot of time dancing in my kitchen.
Wonderful.
Gentlemen, it was a pleasure. I'm very happy that the film Once You Know is in our competition, and thank you both very much for your time. Děkuji i vám, našim divákům, že jste sledovali či poslouchali tento rozhovor a snímek Když už víš, stejně jako více než 100 dalších filmů, můžete zhlédnout na naší platformě watchandknow.cz. Mnoho příjemných zážitků vám přeje Dominik Vontor.